It's a Saturday night in Toronto, a concrete jungle, towering buildings, and constant traffic. Hundreds descending on public space for a new kind of urban ritual.
We're going to be going on a journey that is part meditation, part festival, part dance, part play.
The night is guided by this duo. Larissa Belchich and Michelle Chauffette are artists and designers, known as Nocturnal Medicine.
And we're working on creating the kinds of social and cultural infrastructure that we need in order to address emotional and spiritual aspects of climate change.
Here, in this space, they're giving people a chance to reflect and unwind from the terrifying truths of our time. It's part of a conversation we're starting to have, not about what to do about climate change, but about what it is doing to us.
We're talking about forest fires, we're talking about droughts and deaths. These are heavy topics. They're really big, they're really painful.
And for millions of people, they're also a wake-up call. Across the planet, record-breaking destruction defined a summer of climate reality.
Canada's worst wildfire season.
July was the hottest month on record.
Mass evacuations by road and by air.
So we see it in the news, we see the smoke, we're breathing in the smoke, and yet we don't live in a society that is reflecting these changes. And that's really twisted, actually.
Far from the big city, in this remote place, thousands of kilometers away, people rely on the changing seasons. But Labrador is among the places warming roughly 3 times faster than the rest of the world. Here, they're no strangers to this doom and gloom.
The emotions of this summer, I think, have been so complex for people, where you see how much people actually care, but how much people have suffered and how much has been lost.
Ashley Consolo is the Vice Provost of the Labrador campus of Memorial University and the founding dean of the School of Arctic and Subarctic Studies. Ashley has spent decades researching how changes to our environmental world are intrinsically linked with changes in our mental and emotional health.
Whether people were directly affected and evacuated or people who have been watching, like, you could really see it, this almost collective grief.
Indigenous languages have phrases to describe this, but it was only in 2018 when Ashley and a colleague introduced a new English term in an academic journal: ecological grief.
Whether it's an individual animal, whether it's an ecosystem, a habitat, a body of water, a forest, large-scale climate shifts, anything that is changing around us that is causing an emotional reaction, particularly grief. If you can name something that resonates with people, then that takes it from the individual to the collective and can actually be a very empowering thing for someone who's experiencing the sadness and the loss and the grief around climate change.
Mourning the change of what was and what could be, Ecogrief comes in cascading waves.
One thing leading to another, to another, to another. And then a lot of people just said, look, it's grief without end. Like, everywhere I look, there's something to grieve.
Like many concepts in mental health, Ecogrief is a way to understand real feelings.
It's also a rational and normal and reasonable response to feel badly about it, because people will start to feel bad and they're like, oh, I'm just silly. Like, there's something about us that is not allowing us to go, it's okay that I feel this way. And of course I would feel this way. And this is actually a really healthy response.
Sharing those emotions and our connection to the earth is something Elder Duke Redbird of the Saugeen First Nation does through poetry.
I've gone around the sun 84 times. And in that time, I learned a little wisdom. If the universe were a church or a temple or a synagogue, then Mother Earth is an altar.
His work reflects a relationship. In many colonial views, there is a hierarchy to life on this planet. Nature exists separately or beneath us as human beings. But for Indigenous peoples, we are part of the natural world.
There isn't that binary of environment, ecology, ecosystem is over there, and I'm over here, and I'm grieving this thing over here. It's like you're part of that. You're part of that natural world. The grief is intensely personal.
Deborah McGregor is an Anishinaabe from Whitefish River First Nation, a community along the shores of Lake Huron in Ontario. She's an associate professor at Osgoode Hall Law School and Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Environmental Justice.
Like some people talk about the climate change is really communication of the earth to us saying, this is what happens when you do this.
Have you noticed more people speaking about ecogrief in the recent years?
They're probably not calling it ecogrief because it's just grief. It's loss. It's intergenerational trauma. It's trauma to the natural world itself.
And the way Indigenous cultures frame this is in stories passed on through generations.
Well, you go back to even the Anishinaabe creation, destruction, and recreation story. So there's destruction. Usually that destruction comes because people are misbehaving very badly to each other and the natural world, which I guess we could say is happening now. It's almost like what people are calling crisis and disaster. Why are we so surprised? Of course that's going to happen by what's happening to the earth.
Ecogrief is a symptom of this loss. Deborah says it gives us a starting point to manage how we feel.
When you get bombarded with news all the time of a crisis narrative, crisis narrative, crisis narrative, it's really hard to get excited about what's going to happen 50 years from now. What am I going to be able to do? Ecogrief names what people are feeling. So I think it's an important concept, especially for young people, because now they need to see a future.
My youngest is almost 14, and he'll talk all the time about the emotional legacy. Before, it used to be the talk about you've left a climate crisis, which we absolutely have, but now it's like my generation has left an emotional burden and an emotional crisis on them, and I find that shift really heartbreaking.
It's been 5 years since Ashley's paper naming ecological grief was published. She says it won't be long before we start seeing efforts dedicated to helping people go through this.
And we're seeing it in national assessments, so whether it's by Health Canada or Natural Resources Canada, people are starting to see the importance and starting to realize that this is actually a serious global issue. The human emotion is such an important part and often very overlooked in the climate discussions and in climate action as well.
We all love our home. It's the narrative that runs through Ashley's work in hundreds of conversations.
When I think about ecological grief, I do think about the other side. I think about the joy, the love, the resilience, the beauty, the communion. So going outside and trying to find the beauty and trying to find the joy, like there is, even if it's something really small or something catches my eye or the way the sunlight comes off leaves, there is something underneath it all that is this reminder of our capacity to feel and our capacity to love and our capacity to be human.